So I'd like to introduce Anna Vassilieva. Dr. Vassilieva is the Russian Studies professor at NIS. She's been the head of the department for 2 decades over there. She has a PhD from the Diplomatic Academy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation in Moscow, which I worked to memorize the name of it. So she has just published a book which is coming out, and I need to read the title to you. Russia and East Asia, Informal and Gradual Integration, came out a month ago. She has several books and many articles and chapters in various books. So welcome, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you. Well, we'll see if you still clap when I'm done. Thank you, Karen, for inviting me. Let me also tell you that I'm thrilled to see my students, current and former students here, and thank you so much for coming. This last book that Karen mentioned has a dedication to my students, actually, in it, where I say to current and past students who chose Russian studies as the professional field. We know it hasn't been very popular in the last 20-some years. The brightest minds went into China and or became Arabists, you know, and the propaganda has been so strong, anti-Russian propaganda, that very few, most courageous ones and independent ones want to probe it and go through that black cloud over Russia and actually do the work that deals with this country that is very, very important for the United States. And I always say that United States needs Russia badly, and we just don't realize it for some reason. So I guess why we don't realize it is one of the topics for today. And of course, the background topic would be Ukraine. You know, I've been certainly watching, as many of you, with trepidation what's been happening. And so what I would like to try to do in this format, because, you know, I can see your faces, I know you all know something or a lot, and you would like to perhaps discuss some things that are of concern or of interest to you. So let me just make a relatively short presentation. What I will try to do, I will try to explain Russian behavior, political behavior. I'll try to explain, and for my students it will be a repeat because they took my course on Putin last semester, so some of the things they know by heart in Russian. So, but I will try to explain to you what does the situation mean to Russians. And then perhaps we will talk a little bit about why is it perceived so differently here. Let me try to explain to you where modern Russia is coming from, you know, because what you hear is the resurgence of the empire, you know, the resurgence of Stalin-style politics, you know, autocracy, death to democracy, discrimination of all sorts. So these are the stereotypes, right? So let me take us back a little bit to the collapse of the disintegration of the Soviet Union, rather, and show to you how the changes that happened in the 90s, in 1990s, became much more revolutionary than the changes that took place in 1917. 1917 is the year of the what is called in Russian lore, Soviet lore, Great October Socialist Revolution. So again, forgive me, I know regular American audiences don't like those tours in history, but I know you will, I think, appreciate it. So let me just give you a few ideas, because, you know, when we talk about Ukrainian crisis, you know, we talk about history a lot, you know, at least refer to history. So unless we understand what's happening, you know, it's very difficult to you know, to come to some kind of debate or discussion points. So let me just, again, make a statement that before 1917, Russian mentality, and what I'm trying to give you, I'm not giving you an American interpretation. Every history, you know, has different interpretations. We take a fact and you'll give me 3 interpretations of this history. What I'm trying to do tonight is to give you the Russian version of events. Okay, we may like it, dislike it, reject it, but this is the way most of the people think in Russia. Okay, this is the common discourse that I'm not trying to advocate, but trying to share with you. So until 1917, Russian society was built on 3 foundations. So it was peasant community, it was an agrarian country, okay? It was the monarchy, worshipping of the Tsar, okay? And it was Russian Orthodoxy. Okay, so those Russian Orthodox Church, the religion. So those were the 3 components that were very, very important. Bolsheviks were very smart. When they came in 1917 to power, they left those 3 foundations intact. You know, they just painted them red, and unfortunately, in many cases, it was blood, not paint. So the peasant communities were replaced by collective farms. You know, when the most entrepreneurial, brightest, hardworking peasants were either shot or grabbed and thrown into Siberia. 10 million perished. 10 million. That's 1920s, okay? And everybody else was locked in this collective farm. But the structure remained. Then the Tsar, the monarchy, was replaced by Politburo. You know, very enigmatic. We knew very little, well, close to nothing about personal lives of our leaders. You know, they would just appear like pharaohs. You know, I remember when Brezhnev died and we saw his wife for the first time. Oh my God, you know, after the man was the ruler of the country for decades. You know, so, you know, remember de Gaulle, you know, the leader always has to have mystery, you know, so something that American leaders cannot enjoy, unfortunately, even if they choose to. But, you know, the Soviet leaders did enjoy it, and there was this worshipping, you know, this hierarchy of the Communist Party with dwellers of heaven, you know, небожители, those Politburo members. And so that was replaced, the second component. And of course, instead of Russian Orthodoxy, was a very religious society. You know, we received what? Marxism, Leninism. So the structures, you know, the tradition and the society remain the same. You know, and lots of scholars, you know, many, many books, people who did, British scholars, American scholars, when they go into libraries and they read about what glued the society together, you know, because we have Stalin's regime, for example, you know, Brezhnev's regime. So what does it mean, regime? Where is it? You can't touch it, you know, in the lives of ordinary people, like living in America, that's what you hear. Okay, there is a regime, and it's relevant because we talk about Putin's regime. But in real life, what does it mean? You know, there are no Cossacks with whips. Well, in Sochi we had some, but you know, not in the main Russian cities walking and whipping people into the regime. You know, it doesn't exist. You know, people get together like this. You know, they drink vodka, or they go jog, or they watch movies together, or they go to theaters. So what glues the society together? And so the answer to that is tradition. That's why it's so important for us to understand. So what's Russian idea of the tradition? And how was it violated in the 90s? So pre-revolutionary, remember again, we have monarchy, we have peasant community, we have orthodoxy. Then the break, we have Bolsheviks coming, and we have Politburo, Marxism, Leninism, and collective farm, the foundations. Also, what was very important is proletariat, because the country could not leave. That was the whole idea of Marxism. You know, they needed this force of workers who wouldn't be connected to land. You know, that's why they killed those 10 million peasants, because, you know, those people were independent. You know, they wouldn't need to look into Kremlin or do, you know, they had their cows, they had their dogs, they had their harvest. Ideology was irrelevant to them, so they had to disappear, right? So, you know, it was, you know, moving into this this new era. You know, proletariat was very important, and it's relevant to Ukraine because, you know, it was ironic to see how these young people in Ukraine were knocking down Lenin's statues. You know, because Lenin was the one who, for whatever reasons, but who was the founder of the Ukrainian state as a state. You know, because, you know, when you look at the history of Ukraine, you know, you always see how it was a part of Lithuanian Commonwealth, Polish Commonwealth, you know, how the areas were moving back and forth, you know, and so when the Bolsheviks decided that that's going to be a republic, they just basically added the Russian industrial part, so this east, which is so dangerous, where we say, is Putin going to go further? You know, are Russian boots going to be stampeding, you know, in further beyond Crimea? Why would they do that? Because those areas where Russian population is predominant were brought into the Ukrainian Republic by Bolsheviks who needed proletariat. They needed industrial output, while the West was farmers and students, different, very different culture. So the growth of proletariat and proletariat values. So why is it important for us? It's important to understand why Russians now value some things and do not value others, why liberal politicians are failing and authoritarian politicians remain or flourish. Putin's popularity these days is 80%. So I keep looking at American newspapers and thinking, is somebody going to write an article about it? Because I know if I do, they won't publish it. But somebody, please, just explain. 80% popularity. So you would say, what's wrong with those Russians? Why do they do this? So, and then here we return to the sense of tradition. So what is that is tapped by Putin? The buttons that are pushed by Putin that make people, that create this fervor of support, this patriotic, almost messianism. His speech, I always recommend, and to my students I always say, go, if we were in the class, we would be studying that speech. But if you go and listen to the speech itself, he's not talking just as a leader of the state. He's not talking as a politician. He's talking as a messiah almost. He is the man on a mission of reconstructing not just the economics of his country, not just the borders of his country, not just the pride of his country. He wants to take this country further. And you can see this man, the sense of a mission is something that's new. Putin was very pragmatic until this, Ukrainian situation. But now you could just see the wings are spreading behind his back because he feels that finally, after all these years, since year 2000, he tapped into that tradition, into the depth that, that we're going to the levels of consciousness, those of you who deal with creative issues or psychology, the chthonic level, the subterranean level. These are our instincts. And this is how far he went. And let's look at why. And so that's the bottom level. And then above that is mythological level. And that's also extremely important because between those instincts of defending themselves, and we need to look of why do Russians feel like they have to defend themselves? Look at their territory is enormous. How much more land do they want? Why would they want Ukraine? They almost choked on all those territories. Why? But you have to go into the mythological, into the subterranean and the mythological level to understand what's there in historical mythology of these people that makes them feel so proud, of what is seen in the West as annexation, as crime. How did this conflict of perceptions appear? So mythological level is the second level. Then the third, we have religious level, okay? And that's also very important because we have the resurrection of the church, Russian Orthodox Church. We'll talk about that a little bit. And the way Stalin who destroyed churches when he came to power, destroyed hundreds, thousands of churches in Russia. When during World War II, he got those poor priests, plucked them out of Gulag, and brought them directly to the troops during World War II, so that they speak to those soldiers, so that they inspire them. And this is the kind of crisis that Putin faced in 2000. And Russia by then was the country with destroyed values, destroyed future, destroyed past, destroyed economy. And he had to give them something. And this is how he employs the church. And that's where Russia was, and this is where the church came in. And this is where conservative, traditional values started to come up and grow. And let's talk about that as well. So again, the subterranean, our instincts, then we go mythological level, that's a history. That's us growing up and crying when we watch the movies about those defenders of Sevastopol, when there were in 1854, when there were only 35,000 of those Russian sailors against 170,000 of British, French, Italian, Turkish, Polish attackers. And for 2 years they held that. For 2 years. And as a child growing up, you can feel their blood seeping, through you, that memory, because, you were a child when you read that. Or 1941, again, when there was a double, that's 1 year siege in Sevastopol, the heroism of those defenders. And again, it means nothing to the rest of the world, nothing. Ask, will Ukrainian soldiers die for Sevastopol? No. Or for Crimea? Will American soldiers want to die for Crimea? No. Would the Russian soldiers die for the Crimea? And I tell you, let me pause, yes. And that's because of that tradition, that mythology. So chthonic, mythological, religious. And religious, the main value, again, my students, when I begin my courses, I say, Google moral code of builders of communism and 10 commandments. Google when you come home. Easy to remember, moral code of builder of communism. This was in every school where we studied. And then compare it with 10 commandments. So remember when I said they preserved the structure but repainted it in red, you know? So commitment, and self-sacrifice, dedication. The self-sacrifice goes like a red line throughout. Self-sacrifice. So when that mythology comes in, you understand, you know, that, you know, you press the right buttons and the population will be saying, of course, we cannot give away Crimea. It's not an option. Okay, and we're not talking about 1954 when it was given as a gift and so on. That doesn't matter. Legalities do not matter. You know, again, here we go into Max Weber's typology. And legalities matter a lot to Americans, and legalities matter a lot to West Europeans. Why don't they matter to Russians? We have the value rationale and we have a goal rationale. So value rationale is when people are acting based on their values. They don't calculate what's my next move in order to achieve a goal. They say, my heart is burning, I am angry, or I am happy, or I am committed, and I'm going to be acting based on that. Versus the Western approach is a goal rationale. So you calculate, it doesn't mean that you are cerebral or don't have emotions, but you know, it's goals, you know, you move towards certain goals. That's the difference in mentality. And the law without the goal rationale means not much. You know, and why would the legal system not be an integral part of Russian mentality? Why isn't it? Here, history is important. How did law, the system, legal system, arrive in Russia? Where does it come from? Peter the Great. Peter the Great. So in order to understand that, again, those layers, so let me repeat, I'm being a teacher here, so chthonic, mythological, religious, and then the upper one, I'm repeating because I didn't mention the upper one before I move to another level, is atheistic. When you control the situation. It's not the divine providence. It's not the fate. You know, it's you are in control of the situation, okay? So those are the 4 levels. But let's go back to the Russians specifically, because within the context of Peter the Great, it's very important. Pagans. Pagan society until the 10th century. So Christianity was imposed. Imposed. Russians didn't choose, you know, I mean, if you go see Andrei Rublev by Tarkovsky, you know, this movie has English subtitles, just to show what was happening. So these illiterate peasants were grabbed and in Kiev, capital of Ukraine, dragged into the Dnieper River and baptized forcefully. Forcefully. Their idols were burned, you know, so the religion was imposed on them. So every Russian, why, you know, those of you who had any interaction with Russians, drives you crazy sometimes. They're so superstitious, you can't move, you know. Well, I won't go into there because otherwise we'll never finish. So that, you know, like, you know, when they say scratch a Russian, you'll find a Tatar. So scratch a Russian and that pagan level is just there, you know, so it never, because again, they didn't evolve as Christians. It was brought and imposed forcefully. So we have pagan level in Russians, then we have Christianity level. 10th century, could Christianity evolve like in Western Europe? It could not, had no chance. Why didn't it have a chance? Why are there such different treatments of Christianity and Christ? Because Russia was separated from Western Europe for centuries by Mongol, Tatar yoke. By the way, now according to new textbooks in Russia, you wouldn't be able to use the word Tatar. So they're changing it, becoming more politically correct. So what does that mean? It means that the country was isolated from the rest. You know, it missed Renaissance, it missed pretty much everything, you know, because it was being a buffer, you know, living with the Mongol Tatars for 300 centuries. And what happened was very smart, you know, the Russian princes. So when we talk about the, you know, this patrimonial culture, you know, this, why do we need this one strong leader? Where does it come from? Again, go into history. And those centuries where the princes took upon themselves responsibility to pay taxes and whatever they're supposed to pay to the Tatar Khans. The princes were the ones who were going and kneeling in front of them and climbing through this smoke, to purify themselves. So they took the burden of humiliation. Why was that done, and what did it bring us to? It allowed the new younger generations of Russians to grow up without fear. Okay, but that reliance not on democracy, we as people, okay, but on one man who will take care of things for us. This is where it comes from, okay? And religion, because it was fermented in isolation, brought Russians that deeper sense of, being chosen people. So very common with Israelis, very, very common. There is this, the Soviet Union, again, to you it was evil empire, at least to Ronald Reagan it was evil empire. The Soviet people were growing up thinking we are chosen because we're trying to bring justice to the rest of the world. We're happy, we have the happiest childhood, because, we live in this society that's so unique. Obviously very different interpretations here and very different interpretation of the liberal-minded intelligentsia, okay? So, but we're moving towards Peter the Great. So we have, again, one layer pagans, then imposed Christianity that was fermented in isolation. And then the third level is Peter the Great, our great reformer, who comes in. I won't talk, it's fascinating psychology, but so for whatever reasons there, he decides to modernize Russia. In order to modernize Russia, one of the two things he needs to bring in, and he brings it in, are science and law, all brought in by foreigners. Like religion was brought in by monks, by Greeks. Who spoke Slavic? Nobody spoke the languages. Imagine, Russian Orthodoxy was brought by foreign monks. That's why there were so mistakes. Then there was this religious split up, because once they started to translate text, they realized, well, we haven't been praying right, we haven't been doing the right rituals, so on and so forth. So Peter comes in, and he takes those boyars by their beards and drags them out of their huts, and takes their sons and sends them abroad, and takes their women and puts them in this low-cut dresses with this makeup all over them, and so on, and makes them dance, But the most important thing, what Peter does is not just law, not just science, he steps over then flourishing Commonwealth of Lithuania and Poland, countries that had their purpose by being that forepost, being in front, being the frontier of Catholicism, of Western values. And Peter steps over them and goes directly to Germany and goes directly to Holland. And this is after his reforms, those countries lose their importance. And it's very interesting to see when I go to North Atlantic Assembly meetings, who are the first political meetings of NATO. The first, the most active, I'm looking at Anne-Marie as a representative of Baltic nations, the most active, the first, just people are allowed to talk, the first hands are from the Balts. And it's always, NATO is an alliance of values. And so now they got it. They have now, NATO has to be defensive alliance, so give us tanks, give us brigades, because Putin is going to invade. So there is a purpose. So going back into Russian history before Peter the Great. So law and science never became, Russian science is famous, but because it was brought by foreigners, law never became really a part of mentality. It's a strange, people existed to go around the law. So it is very, very difficult now to have a legal framework that works. I remember when Khodorkovsky was arrested the second time, and I was on NewsHour, I believe, and somebody asked me, Gwen, I think it was, interviewing me, and she said, well, so how come that the rule of law is not working in Russia? And my reaction was, since when? Why? Who decided that the rule of law should be working in Russia? When did it work? When did it work? Read Tolstoy, Resurrection. What happened? Read Varlam Shalamov about Gulag. What happened? When? Give us examples. Show examples when legal system worked. There are no precedents. Am I an optimist? Do I believe that it will work eventually? It will. Because Putin's goal is not to be, Western-style politician. Again, we're looking at Merkel. She's pushing it a little bit, right, in terms of the time limit there. And so Germans have also a different way to look at it. But it's not 2, 4, 8. He thinks he's Stolypin, the Russian reformer of the 20th century. He thinks he needs 20 years. Maybe he needs 30 years to stabilize the country. Okay, very different way to look at it, because Putin is not thinking about what the West will think of him. And Putin, unfortunately, is not even thinking what the Russian people will think of him. He doesn't concern himself with that. He thinks of what it takes to get the country out of the hole in which it was. And once the country is out of the hole, how to direct this country so that it becomes a normal country. Okay, so that's the way he thinks. So all these levels, the paganism, then we have this Christianity, then we have Westernization, then we have communism. And so remember my thesis originally when I said the 90s was much more a revolution. It's essential for us to go back. And I know for some of my students, when they just come, for them Gorbachev is like Napoleon. It's the same kind of. It was such a long time ago, and it wasn't true, as Russians say. So, but in reality, it wasn't. It is really important to understand it, because what Gorbachev did unwillingly, it wasn't his plan. He created conditions, also being that sole ruler, continuing that glorious tradition of autocracy. He created conditions when the country disintegrated, and along with the country disintegrated its social infrastructure, its economic infrastructure, its army. I don't know if you saw today in the New York Times the article about army, the first compliment, which is perverse in a way, that the Russian army is becoming such a great professional army. It was very interesting to read that. Security, values disintegrated.